It's time to rate all of the cards in Battle Spirit Saga's second set, False Gods. In this video, we're going to go over the red and purple cards. And just for the record, I'm also including the new tournament promos into these reviews. For those not in the know, I'll be rating these cards on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being one of the best cards that'll see competitive success in Tier 1 style of decks, while a 1 represents the worst of the worst, and won't see any love alongside Quicksand Dragon. Before we dive into red cards proper, I'm going to get all of the red and purple vanillas out of the way. All of them get a 1-star rating. Unfortunately, False Gods suffers from an insane amount of vanilla spirits, and when it comes to red and purple, all of them are terrible. I really hope Set 3 doesn't have this many pack filler commons. Dragno King is in a weird spot. It's expensive, and it's a Dragonoid, so the Pterosaur deck doesn't want to play this card. I don't think it fits in the Zigworm deck either, and the other Dragonoid cards aren't good enough to justify making a Dragonoid deck. In fact, I'm giving those cards a 1-star rating because they're all just straight up bad. But I don't think Dragno King is a bad card in itself, and yet I don't think I can rate it higher than 2 stars. In theory, this could slot in some type of red control deck, but I don't think there's enough to make that a reality. At most, people will try this out and then move on to better things. Moving on to probably the more interesting part of the new red cards, the Awakened support. For starters, Meteor Dragon Zigworm, I'll give 3 stars to. The funny thing is, I don't think this card is that much better than the Thunder Dragon, but it draws a card, which is something that the Zigworm deck will appreciate. The other cards are really wanting to make an Awakened deck work, with 10 Sword Saint being the payoff. Great Desk Mountains is a fascinating nexus for the archetype that encourages an aggressive playstyle while allowing you to still retain a decent blocker by refreshing one of your guys. Unfortunately, I don't think these cards are good enough. 10 Sword Saint just requires too much setup to make worthwhile, and in a world where people are already trying to play around Burning Force, makes this even less enticing. Bogwo is actually a decent Awakened spirit, but what the deck really needs is a good early game spirit. Phoenix I'm straight up calling a 1-star card. This is just a slight upgrade on the terrible Moonbow Dragoon, and I don't think even the Awakened deck will want to play this. The rest of them, I'll give 2 stars to. As for the red Void Lord, Emperor Era, 3 stars. I do think it's a neat tech card against decks that like to make wide boards, but it's nothing more than that. Photon Dragon, 1 star. There's this card from Dawn of History called Divine Halberd Dragon Arc. Play that instead. Dragoon Commander Deridalos, 2 stars. I can see a world where aggressive red decks that like to play Nebula Dragon try to replace it with this guy. Beyond that, the card is too expensive to make it into the Pterosaur deck. At best, it'll be experimented with. Edmont Sword, 1 star. Card is too slow. The Pterosaur deck wants to play aggro, and this card doesn't fit in that build. King Vulture. Look, I get it. You hate Netherworld Depths and want to destroy it on sight. I understand. Don't worry, I have great news. You Pterosaur players just got another great Nexus removal option alongside Burning Force, and that card is called Nexus Hazard. As for King Vulture, it's a 2-star card. This is purely a side deck card, and I'm not sure it's even going to see room in that. It's not bad, but I do think some people are overestimating it simply because it trounces on Netherworld Depths. Lava Beast Volrus, 1 star. This is just a bad card. Meteorite Impact Zone. This card is almost really good. I like the idea of a delayed charge draw that just sits there giving you a symbol until you want to crack it open for extra cards. I just don't think it's good enough to replace Volcanic Canyon and Scorched Battlefield. For that reason, it's a 1-star card. Flame Crystal, 1 star. It's expensive, and its effects are terrible. Seriously, what a bad card. Nexus Hazard, 5 stars. This just slots right into the existing Pterosaur decks as a side grade to Burning Force. Honestly, you could even make an argument that it's better than Burning Force. Yeah, most of the time it's going to be a little more expensive, but playing this on your main step to pop 2 things and draw a card is just so good. Obviously, the card is great. Trident Flare, 1 star. Even in a world where there's a deck that puts out a bunch of small guys like ant tokens, I think you still play Burning Force over this simply because it's cheaper and more flexible. Lightning Aura. This card is spicy and is definitely going to see experimentation in a variety of decks. The one that people are most excited about is pairing this with Queen Meduc and a small curse spirit to potentially OTK. Fun idea, but it's a very win more idea. That said, 3 costs is just cheap enough to be splashed into anything, and for that I believe it'll find a home somewhere. 3 stars. And Horned Dragonoid Tricero, I'll give 2 stars to. Yes, it's a cheap Pterosaur, but I don't think this card is good enough to see play in the Pterosaur deck. I think it'll see experimentation and then be dropped. Purple gets some really neat cards for a more graveyard/reanimation style of deck. The big flashy card for this strategy is Void Ogre Emperor Avaritia. This guy can revive for free any Void Lord or Undead Spirit from the discard. One of the notable targets is the other new purple X-Rare of the set, Floating Grave White Whale. You can also revive Queen Meduc, or even Curse Dragon, but its when summoned effect won't trigger. I'll let you know right now that I don't think the self-milling cards are, generally speaking, worth playing a deck around. In my opinion, if you really want to get cards in the discard, you're better off playing 4 copies of Core Theft and calling it a day. Having said that, I don't think you need to play the self-milling cards to play Avaritia. He's good enough that you won't mind teching a copy or 2 in your deck as a late-game bomb. I give this Void Lord 4 stars. While I don't think you need him in your purple deck, I do think he'll see enough play to prove that he's a good card. As for the White Whale, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. Similar to Curse Dragon, the whale needs other cards to fully take advantage of its core removal effect. However, my gut tells me it's not good enough to play over the regular purple good stuff. 2 stars. There will definitely be people who try to make this work, but I still think the Baculus Curse Dragon combo reigns supreme. This actually segues nicely to the new Immortal Spirits, Gigasha and Cyclowinder. With these 2 in conjunction with Beldegor, it's no wonder people have dreams of just easily milling these guys off the top of the deck. The problem is these 2 aren't nearly as good as Beldegor by themselves. I mean, Cyclowinder is basically just a glorified vanilla. That said, I think Cyclowinder is good enough to include as a Saki 1-of copy in your deck to discard off of Core Theft or the occasional mill off of Reanimate. For that, I'll give it 3 stars. Gigasha is much better, but not because its level 2 is any good. It's a 5-cost Immortal Spirit that can die into Beldegor, and the reason why I think you don't necessarily need to run Cyclowinder in your deck is because you're already playing good 6-cost spirits in Baculus and Blacklance. This is why I'm a lot more confident in Gigasha's immediate future. I'll give it 4 stars for actually being a good card. Gravedigger Skeleton, 2 stars. This is a card I don't think is good enough right now. The only cheap spirit that current builds of Purple Control run is Camelot Knight, which would be decent if it didn't come in exhausted. It might see some experimentation in Purple Aggro, since that's the deck with all the 2-cost and lower spirits. But for now, I think we're waiting for better 2-costs in Purple. It's funny to think about playing this in yellow to revive stuff like Freestall and Penton, but I don't think it's good enough there. And no, you're not playing Flamefish to justify this card. While we're on the topic of 2-cost spirits, I might as well bring up Azalea here. She's just a cheap curse unit, which sounds nice. Some purple decks were already playing Boa Trickster. What kills this card's playability is her when summoned effect has a chance of exhausting her. That's just not okay. I'll give her 2 stars, simply because I think she'll see experimentation in exactly purple aggro. And there's also Viperola, which I'm giving a 1 star. Maybe in the distant future, where there's a really good Nexus that actually needs a core on it to maintain itself, then maybe this card will see play. Until then, I don't think this sees any play. Imperial Night God Avalo Palladian. This spirit is really cool. The potential to draw 2 cards every turn is insane, and if your opponent destroys it, Palladian is going to take something down with it. 5 stars. I think this is exactly what purple mid-range decks needed, particularly ones that play Nemesis. I would be really sad if this card didn't see success. Dark Knight Lamorak. 5 stars. This card is so good. Fun fact, in case it isn't clear, its level 2 effect can trigger off of its own destruction, meaning this can be just a constant annoyance for your opponent to deal with. On top of that, it's a 4-cost spirit for Beldegor's Immortal effect. This is an immediate staple in purple decks. Kronos Boros. 1 star. The when summoned effect is certainly unique, but I don't think it's good enough. Notably, it is a serpent for Rotting Swamp to recycle, but I think it's just too expensive for what it's offering. Diviner Dragonaga, 1 star. At worst, it does nothing while triggering your opponent's burst. At best, it mills an immortal spirit while triggering your opponent's burst. Yeah, I don't believe in this card. Elefog, 1 star. It's a 5-cost for reduction curse spirit, which doesn't sound bad. I just think there are better cards to be playing over this. Dark Queen Guinevere. Hesitant 2 stars. There are purple good stuff decks that don't play the Baculus Curse Dragon combo, and I think Guinevere finds a home in exactly that deck alongside Black Lance as a 6-cost spirit to die to Gigasha. Beyond that, I think this card is mid. Scullion, 1 star. This is just a bad version of Deadly Balance. Even if the Void Lord didn't stop the revived spirit's when summoned effect, Scullion still wouldn't see play. Dead Rock Fortress. The fact that its second effect only triggers on the opponent's attack step is a crime. That being said, this card's first effect is interesting in conjunction with Baculus. The obvious downside is that your opponent chooses which spirit to remove cores from, but if you just played Baculus and you successfully deal damage, you're going to kill something. I do think this Nexus is better than it looks at first glance. The question is whether or not there's room for this card. I'll give this 3 stars. I think there's a lot of potential here. Impaler Forest, 1 star. Its second effect is kind of interesting, but I don't think it's good enough. Monstrous Mausoleum, 1 star. Cool art, but the card is terrible. If you want to draw cards, just play Netherworld Depths. Reanimate, 5 stars. This card is insane. Being able to revive cards like Mordred, Kingsnake, or even Beldegor and trigger their when summoned effects is so good. And of course, this has potential uses outside of purple. Whether or not we see that during Set 2 meta remains to be seen. But regardless, this card is an immediate staple in purple, and it can only get more insane as time goes on. The Hanged Man, 1 star. This card is almost good. Essentially, it's a pseudo-exhaust in purple. I think what really kills the card for me is even if your opponent goes through with using the Hanged Spirit to block, the attack will still be blocked even if the spirit died beforehand. It's an interesting card, but interesting cards don't always make for good cards. Assassinate. This card pisses me off. Why is this a main step only effect? Why? 2 stars. I think some people will experiment with it, but nothing more. And finally, Crystal Crack, 1 star. As far as I'm concerned, this is just a worse version of Amethyst Radiance. Like I indicated earlier, I just don't believe in the self-milling strategy for purple, and this card does not change my mind. So, when it comes to red and purple, this set serves more to boost existing decks rather than to introduce new strategies. Aside from some notable exceptions like Nexus Hazard, Reanimate, and Lamorak, most of these cards are underpowered compared to what we already have. It also doesn't help that a good portion of the cards in this set are bad vanillas. But we'll see. I've been wrong before. If you found this video to be helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more Battle Spirit Saga content. Until next time, laters.